What began as an ordinary visit to a neighborhood bank became the kind of moment no one could take back. Caleb Brooks never raised his voice when his certified $5 million check was destroyed before his daughter's eyes. He simply stood there with quiet dignity while assumptions replaced facts. Then the bank's CEO appeared, rushing into the lobby with unmistakable urgency, revealing that the man everyone had doubted was someone the entire executive team had been waiting to meet. Yet the greatest surprise wasn't who Caleb was. It was the choice he made after being humiliated, a choice that would forever change the bank and every customer who walked through its doors. At 4:57 on a gray Friday afternoon, First Harbor Bank was already closing around Caleb Brooks. Tellers counted cash beneath cold white lights. Outside, Caleb's dented work van sat at the curb, its ladder rack streaked with dust. Beside him, his 10-year-old daughter Maya hugged her backpack and watched bank manager Vanessa Cole hold a $5 million check beneath the desk lamp. Vanessa studied Caleb's worn work jacket, then the check, as if the two could not belong in the same room. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "The issuing bank is listed at the bottom," Caleb said. "Call them." His driver's license, licensing letter, transaction code, and appointment notice lay on the counter. Vanessa barely glanced at them. Maya moved closer. "Dad, are we still going to the craft store?" Caleb rested a hand on her shoulder. "We will." Vanessa gave a short laugh. "You expect me to believe a man in a maintenance coat is carrying a legitimate $5 million check?" The lobby went quiet. Caleb's jaw tightened. "What I'm wearing has nothing to do with whether that check is real." A young teller named Sophie spoke carefully. "Ms. Cole, the scanner says executive verification required. I can call upstairs." "No." Vanessa pulled the check away. "I know fraud when I see it." She stamped the front in hard red letters. "Suspected fraud." Maya flinched. "Do not destroy that document," Caleb said. 36 families are waiting on that deposit. Their temporary housing ends Monday morning." Vanessa looked at him as though he had added another lie. Then she pushed the check into the secure shredder. The motor caught. Paper folded between steel teeth and fell in thin white strips behind the glass panel. Maya stared at the pieces. Caleb pulled her against his side. He did not pound the counter or raise his voice. He only looked at Vanessa. "You may have just taken shelter away from 36 families." Vanessa lifted the phone. "Marcus, lock the doors. Call the police." The guard hesitated, then turned the deadbolt. A bell chimed behind them. The elevator doors opened, and a silver-haired woman in a navy suit hurried into the lobby, leaving 2 executives behind her. Her eyes found Caleb at once. "Mr. Brooks," CEO Elaine Langford called across the bank. "We've been waiting for you on the 12th floor." Every sound inside the lobby seemed to disappear. The security guard froze with one hand still resting on the locked glass door. Sophie lowered the phone she had been holding. Even Vanessa Cole looked as though the color had drained from her face. Elaine crossed the polished marble floor without slowing down. "What happened here?" she asked, her eyes moving from Caleb's calm expression to Maya's frightened face, then to the clear bin beneath the shredder filled with narrow strips of paper. Vanessa recovered first. "Ms. Langford, this man attempted to cash what appeared to be a fraudulent check. I followed security protocol." Elaine looked directly at Caleb. "Did anyone verify the transaction?" "No," Caleb answered quietly. "Did anyone call the issuing bank?" "No." Elaine's gaze shifted toward Sophie. The young teller swallowed. "The system instructed us to contact executive banking. I tried to explain that, but... She glanced toward Vanessa before lowering her eyes. Elaine understood the rest without another word. She walked to the shredder, looked at the paper strips inside, then took a slow breath. That check should never have been destroyed. Maya squeezed her father's hand. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Caleb knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart." His voice stayed gentle despite the knot tightening inside his chest. "We're going to tell the truth. That's all we've ever done." Elaine heard him. For a brief moment, she remembered the first time Caleb had sat across from her in a conference room 6 months earlier. He had spoken with that same calm voice while refusing an offer worth far more than most independent inventors ever received. Money had never seemed to impress him. Responsibility always had. She turned back toward Vanessa. "Do you know who Mr. Brooks is?" Vanessa hesitated. "He presented himself as a maintenance worker." "He is a maintenance worker," Elaine replied. "And he's also the engineer who designed Open Door Alert." The name hung in the room. Marcus frowned. Sophie looked up in surprise. Vanessa blinked twice. Elaine continued. "The partnership documents for that project are waiting upstairs. Our board has been waiting for Mr. Brooks for nearly half an hour." Nobody spoke. Caleb finally broke the silence. "The meeting can wait." Elaine looked at him. "The families can't." He glanced once toward the shredded paper. "That payment wasn't meant for me. Most of it belongs to the 214 Safe Homes Fund. Every hour we lose delays emergency housing for 36 families." Elaine nodded slowly. "I know." She faced the security guard. "Please unlock the doors." Marcus immediately reached for the lock. Then Elaine addressed the entire lobby. "No one is calling the police." Vanessa stepped forward. "With respect, Ms. Langford, I believed I was protecting the bank." Elaine answered without raising her voice. "A bank protects itself by following procedures, not by replacing them with assumptions." Those words landed harder than a shout. Maya looked up at her father. She could feel everyone staring now, but Caleb still hadn't raised his voice once. That confused her more than anything. She whispered, "Dad, why aren't you angry?" Caleb looked at the frightened little girl beside him instead of the people around him. "Because if I lose myself," he said softly, "then today takes something from us that no one has the right to take." Maya nodded, though she wasn't sure she fully understood. Elaine looked at the father and daughter standing together beneath the harsh bank lights and realized the real damage wasn't lying inside the shredder. It was written across the face of a little girl who had just watched strangers decide what her father was worth before anyone bothered to learn his name, and she knew the hardest conversation of the day had not even begun. Elaine Langford slowly turned toward Vanessa. "I need every security recording from this lobby preserved," she said. "Every camera angle, every scanner log, every phone record from the last 30 minutes. Vanessa straightened her blazer. "Of course." "No," Elaine replied, her voice steady. "Not of course. I need to know why my instructions were ignored." Silence settled over the lobby again. Sophie finally spoke. "The system flagged Mr. Brooks as an executive appointment. It instructed us to contact your office before processing the transaction." Elaine nodded. "And did anyone make that call?" "I tried." Sophie hesitated, looking toward her manager. "I was told not to." Vanessa folded her arms. "We've had 2 attempted fraud cases this quarter. I made a judgment call." Elaine didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked to the counter where Caleb's driver's license, appointment letter, and identification still lay untouched. "They were never examined," she said quietly. They didn't need to be, Vanessa answered. Everything about this situation looked wrong. Caleb finally spoke. What looked wrong? Vanessa met his eyes. You arrived in a work van. Yes. You were wearing a maintenance jacket. I still am. You walked in 5 minutes before closing with a $5 million check. Caleb gave a small nod. Those are facts, he said. None of them are evidence. No one in the lobby moved. Marcus looked down at the floor. Sophie slowly closed the customer file in front of her. Elaine picked up the appointment letter. My office scheduled this meeting 3 weeks ago. She held it up. My assistant confirmed it yesterday. Then she looked at Vanessa. So tell me, at what point did you decide that your assumptions mattered more than verification? Vanessa searched for an answer, but found none that sounded convincing even to herself. Maya quietly tugged on her father's sleeve. Dad? He looked down. Are those families still waiting? He paused before answering. Yes. Because of us? Caleb gently shook his head. No, sweetheart. He brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face. They're waiting because something that should have been simple became difficult. Elaine heard every word. The calm in Caleb's voice made the damage feel even heavier. Most people would have shouted. Some would have threatened lawsuits. Others would have walked away. Instead, the man standing in front of her was thinking about 36 families he couldn't even see. She understood again why her board had insisted on meeting him personally. Not because of the technology he had created, because of the man who had created it. Elaine faced the employees. Before anyone leaves this building today, I want every remaining document connected to Mr. Brooks's transaction secured. She turned back toward Caleb. I can't undo what happened to your check. I know, but I can begin fixing what happened here. Caleb glanced at the transparent shredder bin. Thin white strips lay tangled together like snow. It isn't the paper I'm worried about, he said quietly. Elaine followed his eyes. What is it then? Caleb looked toward Maya. What she remembers from today. His answer lingered in the room long after he stopped speaking. For the first time since entering the lobby, Vanessa looked at the little girl instead of the check. She saw trembling hands gripping an old backpack. She saw frightened eyes avoiding every bank employee. And she realized the mistake she'd made had reached far beyond a financial transaction. But outside, the fading Friday sunlight reminded everyone of another problem. The weekend clock was still ticking, and somewhere across the city, 36 families were waiting for a promise that had just been shredded with a single sheet of paper. No one in the lobby seemed willing to move first. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, while the last glow of the evening settled against the front windows. Outside, commuters hurried past the bank, unaware that a single decision inside had placed dozens of families' futures in limbo. Elaine looked at Caleb. Is there any way to replace the check before Monday? There is, Caleb answered, but it isn't simple. She waited. The issuing bank can void it and create another one. The problem is timing. Their executive office closes in less than 20 minutes, and the authorization has to go through several departments. Elaine checked the time on her phone. We're running out of daylight. We've been running out of time all day, Caleb replied. His words carried no accusation. That somehow made them heavier. Sophie stepped forward with quiet determination. If the original transaction record is still active, I may be able to pull the digital verification number from the archive before the overnight system locks. Vanessa looked at her. You don't have authorization. Elaine answered before Sophie could. She does now. Sophie hurried back behind the counter, fingers flying across the keyboard. Screens reflected across her glasses as she searched through encrypted transaction logs. Marcus unlocked the front doors completely. The metallic click echoed through the empty lobby. "I should have questioned the order," he admitted quietly to Caleb. Caleb gave him a small nod. "You were trying to do your job." Marcus lowered his eyes. "Maybe. But doing your job isn't the same as doing what's right." For the first time that afternoon, Caleb allowed himself the faintest smile. That's a lesson most people spend a lifetime learning. Across the lobby, Vanessa stood motionless. Everything she had relied on, experience, instinct, confidence, felt strangely fragile. She had believed she could recognize fraud by appearance. Now every assumption replayed in her mind. The dusty work boots, the faded maintenance jacket, the old cargo van outside. None of them had been evidence, only excuses. Sophie suddenly looked up from her monitor. "I found it!" Everyone turned toward her. "The transaction exists." Hope flickered across Maya's face. "So we're okay?" Sophie hesitated. "Not yet." She pointed to the screen. "The payment is waiting for manual executive confirmation. Until the issuing bank receives a replacement request, these funds can't move." Elaine picked up the secure phone on the counter. "Connect me to executive banking at Crescent National. Emergency priority." The operator answered immediately. After a brief pause, Elaine's expression changed. "They've already closed for the weekend." The words settled over the room like cold rain. Maya looked at her father. "What happens to the families now?" Caleb looked toward the darkening sky beyond the glass doors. "I don't know." It was the first honest answer all evening that carried uncertainty. He hated saying those words. Not because they made him look weak. Because somewhere, parents he had never met were probably telling their own children everything would be all right. And tonight, he wasn't sure they could keep that promise. Elaine slowly lowered the phone. There has to be another way. Caleb thought for a long moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his worn work jacket and removed a folded envelope that had remained untouched through the entire confrontation. "I didn't want to use this unless I had no other choice," he said. Elaine recognized the signature printed across the sealed flap before anyone else could. Her eyes widened. "If that's what I think it is." Caleb nodded once. "It may be the only chance those families have before Monday." Every person in the lobby stared at the unopened envelope, realizing the shredded check had never been the only thing Caleb had brought into the bank that evening. Caleb looked down at the envelope for a long moment, then quietly slipped it back inside his jacket. "No," he said. "That isn't the answer." Elaine studied him. "Why not?" "Because if we solve this by pulling out another document, then we never solve what happened 5 minutes ago." The lobby fell silent again. Vanessa frowned. "I don't understand." Caleb met her eyes for the first time since the check had disappeared into the shredder. "I didn't come here to prove I'm important." His voice remained calm. "I came here to make a deposit." Those simple words landed harder than any accusation. Elaine slowly nodded. She understood exactly what he meant. If the only reason this situation changed was because Caleb had another connection, another signature, or another person willing to intervene, then every customer who walked through these doors tomorrow, without those advantages, could face the same treatment. She turned toward the counter. "Sophie." "Yes, ma'am." "I want every digital record connected to Mr. Brooks' transaction displayed in the conference room upstairs. Scanner logs, Timestamps, verification requests, everything. Sophie nodded immediately. And contact our technology team. I want to know whether the issuing bank can authenticate the transaction electronically, even though the paper instrument has been destroyed. I'll do it. Marcus stepped away from the entrance. I'll make sure no one touches the shredder or the security recordings. Elaine thanked him with a brief nod before looking back at Caleb. I owe you an apology. You don't, Caleb answered. She looked surprised. You weren't the one standing behind that counter. No, Elaine said quietly. But I am responsible for everyone who was. Caleb didn't argue. Maya tugged gently on his sleeve. Dad, can we still help those families? He smiled, tired but reassuring. We're going to keep trying. She looked at the clear shredder bin. But the check is gone. The paper is gone. Caleb corrected softly. The promise isn't. Across the room, Vanessa heard every word. She glanced toward the red stamp still lying on the counter. Suspected fraud. Just minutes earlier, she'd pressed it down without hesitation. Now it seemed heavier than the stack of binders behind her desk. She remembered Sophie's warning. She remembered the phone call asking whether Caleb Brooks had arrived. She remembered deciding not to verify a single document because she'd already made up her mind. For the first time in years, confidence gave way to doubt. Elaine broke the silence. Mr. Brooks, would you come upstairs with me? Caleb looked toward Maya. She gave a small nod. I'll stay with you. Elaine smiled gently. You're both coming. As they walked toward the elevator, Caleb paused beside the counter. He looked at Vanessa, not with anger, but with quiet disappointment. I hope, he said, the next father who walks through these doors never has to prove his dignity before anyone checks his paperwork. The elevator doors slid open. Caleb took Maya's hand, and together they stepped inside with Elaine. Behind them, Sophie gathered the untouched identification documents that should have been reviewed from the very beginning. Vanessa remained standing alone in the fading light of the lobby, staring at the empty space where a simple act of verification could have changed everything. As the elevator doors closed, none of them knew that the answers waiting on the 12th floor would explain far more than the value of a $5 million check. They would reveal why Caleb Brooks had become the one person the bank could not afford to lose. The ride upstairs was almost silent. The polished steel walls reflected the four people standing inside. Maya held tightly to her father's hand. Elaine watched the floor numbers climb. Caleb stood with the same quiet posture he had maintained since entering the bank, though the exhaustion around his eyes betrayed the weight of the day. When the doors opened on the executive floor, a long conference table stretched across a room lined with windows overlooking downtown Milwaukee. Several board members rose to their feet. One of them, gray-haired attorney Richard Nolan, walked straight toward Caleb. Mr. Brooks, he said, extending his hand. We've been waiting to finalize this partnership. Caleb shook it politely. I'm sorry we're late. Elaine answered before anyone else could. The delay wasn't his fault. Her tone told the room that the conversation could wait. She placed the shredded check incident on the table in only a few sentences, leaving nothing out. Not the ignored verification request, not the destroyed check, and not the frightened little girl standing beside her father. No one interrupted. When she finished, the room remained silent. Richard slowly closed the partnership folder in front of him. Then before we discuss signatures, he said, everyone in this room deserves to understand exactly who Mr. Brooks is. He opened another binder. Inside were photographs, apartment buildings, fire-damaged hallways, families gathered outside temporary shelters, children wrapped in blankets on winter mornings. Maya quietly stepped closer to the table. Richard pointed to the first photograph. 7 years ago, after a fatal apartment fire on the north side of Milwaukee, Mr. Brooks began volunteering his evenings inspecting aging fire alarm systems. Caleb lowered his eyes. He had never liked hearing that story told. Eventually, Richard continued, he designed a low-cost monitoring device that existing apartment buildings could actually afford. Elaine looked toward the prototype resting in a display case near the wall. A small metal unit. Nothing flashy. No polished marketing. Just a practical solution built by someone who understood what happened when alarms failed. "Open door alert," Maya whispered. Richard smiled. "That's right," he continued. 3 manufacturers wanted exclusive rights. Each offered significantly more money if Mr. Brooks agreed to higher pricing. And he refused, Elaine added, because affordable safety mattered more than maximizing profit. Caleb folded his arms. "I wasn't trying to be noble." Everyone looked at him. "I just kept thinking about families living where we used to live." The room grew quiet again. Maya looked at the photographs. She recognized one immediately. A faded picture showed an apartment building with smoke-darkened brick. Without saying a word, she reached into her backpack and gently touched the old brass key hanging from the zipper. "Number 214. Richard noticed. "Is that?" Caleb nodded once. "It belonged to our apartment." No one spoke for several seconds. Elaine finally broke the silence. The $5 million payment wasn't compensation for an invention. She looked around the table. "It was the first licensing payment under the community pricing agreement Mr. Brooks insisted on." Richard slid another document forward, and nearly all of it was already committed. He pointed to the figures. 214 Safe Homes Fund. Building inspections, emergency repairs, temporary housing, 36 displaced families. Every dollar had already been assigned before Caleb ever walked into the bank. Maya looked up at her father. "So, none of it was really ours?" Caleb smiled gently. "We had enough," she frowned. "But we don't." He brushed a hand across her shoulder. "We have what matters." Elaine watched the exchange and understood why every negotiation with Caleb had ended the same way. He never measured success by what stayed in his pocket, only by what reached the people who needed it most. Then a soft knock came at the conference room door. An assistant stepped inside carrying a tablet. She looked directly at Elaine. "It's executive banking from Crescent National is returning your emergency call." Every eye in the room turned toward the screen. The future of 36 waiting families now depended on what would be said next. Elaine accepted the secure video call. A middle-aged man appeared on the monitor, still wearing his overcoat, as if he had been stopped on his way out the door. "Daniel Mercer, Executive Banking, Crescent National," he said. "Ms. Langford, your message sounded urgent." "It is," Elaine replied. "A certified licensing check issued by your bank was destroyed before it could be processed." Daniel frowned. "Destroyed?" He looked down at another screen, typing quickly. "Give me the transaction number." Caleb slid the folded appointment letter across the table. Sophie had copied the digital reference before leaving the lobby, and Elaine read it aloud. For several long seconds, only the tapping of keys filled the room. Then Daniel looked back up. "The transaction is valid." A quiet breath escaped around the conference table. "The funds are fully secured," Daniel continued. "Nothing about this payment has been flagged." Elaine nodded. Can the original check be replaced tonight? Daniel's expression became more serious. Yes, but only if the receiving institution provides a formal incident report confirming the original instrument was destroyed before deposit. I'll sign it immediately, Elaine said. Daniel shook his head. The report cannot come from one executive alone. It must include the branch manager responsible for the incident. The room fell silent again. Vanessa. Elaine slowly looked toward the conference room door. She's still downstairs. Richard Nolan closed the folder in front of him. Then we bring her upstairs. Minutes later, Marcus escorted Vanessa into the executive suite. She stopped just inside the doorway. The board members, the photographs, the prototype of open door alert, the little brass key hanging from Maya's backpack. For the first time since the confrontation began, Vanessa could finally see everything that had existed beyond the counter where she had stood. Daniel's voice came through the speakers. Ms. Cole, I need one answer. She looked toward the monitor. Did you verify the authenticity of the check before destroying it? Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She glanced toward Caleb. He didn't rescue her. He didn't accuse her. He simply waited. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Finally, Vanessa lowered her eyes. No. Daniel gave a slow nod. I thank you for your honesty. He entered another authorization into his system. Because you've acknowledged the procedural failure, I can begin issuing a replacement instrument immediately. Hope returned to Maya's face. So the families can still get their homes? Daniel smiled gently. If everything is completed tonight, yes. A wave of relief moved through the room, but Caleb didn't celebrate. There are still families sleeping in temporary shelters tonight, he said quietly. The paperwork matters. So do they. Elaine looked at him with renewed respect. Even now, with his own name finally cleared, his first concern remained people who weren't in the room. Richard turned toward Vanessa. This replacement check solves one problem. He paused. But it doesn't solve what happened in your lobby. Vanessa nodded slowly. I know. She looked at Caleb. I judged you before I examined a single document. Her voice trembled. I told myself I was protecting the bank. Caleb answered gently. You were protecting an assumption. No one challenged his words, because everyone in the room knew they were true. Daniel cleared his throat from the monitor. The replacement payment will be ready within the hour. He smiled faintly. But Mr. Brooks. Yes? I've worked in banking for 28 years. He looked directly into the camera. I've never seen anyone worry less about $5 million than the people it was meant to help. The screen went dark as the secure connection ended. For the first time that evening, there was genuine hope. But Caleb's eyes drifted toward the windows overlooking Milwaukee. The money might still arrive. The families might still be safe. Yet one question refused to leave his mind. If this could happen to him, with appointments, documents, and people waiting upstairs, what happened every day to those who walked into a bank with nothing but their dignity? The conference room grew quiet after the video call ended. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the last light of Friday faded behind the Milwaukee skyline. Office towers switched on one row of lights after another, while traffic crawled across the bridges below. Elaine remained standing at the head of the table. The replacement check will solve tonight's emergency, she said, but Caleb is asking a different question. No one answered, because everyone understood exactly what she meant. Richard Nolan closed the partnership binder. "If this incident becomes only an apology and a replacement payment," he said, "we'll have fixed the transaction without fixing the system." Caleb leaned back slightly in his chair. "I didn't come here looking for someone to lose a job." Vanessa looked up, surprised. "I know that doesn't change what happened," Caleb continued. "But if the lesson today is simply, don't misjudge me because I turned out to matter, then we've learned the wrong lesson." Elaine folded her hands. "What lesson should we learn?" Caleb looked toward Maya. She had wandered over to the display case holding the first open-door alert prototype. The small metal device looked almost ordinary beneath the lights. "When I built that," Caleb said quietly, "I wasn't designing it for buildings that already had perfect safety." He paused. "I built it for places where ordinary people were overlooked until something went wrong." The room remained still. "Our procedures should work the same way." Richard slowly nodded. "For everyone." "For everyone," Caleb agreed. Maya turned around. "Dad?" He smiled. "Yeah, sweetheart? Is that the first one you ever made?" He walked over beside her. "It is." The brushed aluminum box was scratched at the corners. A faded label with handwritten wiring notes was still attached to one side. "It doesn't look very special," Maya admitted. Caleb laughed softly. "It wasn't supposed to." He rested a hand on the glass. "It just had to work." Elaine watched the exchange. Months earlier, her engineering team had suggested redesigning the device with polished casing and premium branding before launch. Caleb had refused. He insisted every extra dollar spent on appearance was one less dollar available for installing alarms in older apartment buildings. That decision had frustrated investors. Tonight, it suddenly made perfect sense. A quiet knock interrupted the moment. Sophie stepped into the conference room carrying a printed report. "I thought everyone should have this." Elaine accepted it. Across the top, the document listed every action taken during the failed transaction. Time of arrival, check scanned, executive verification requested, verification canceled, fraud stamp applied, document destroyed, police requested. Each line was followed by the name of the employee responsible. The report was brutally simple. No opinions, no excuses, just choices. Vanessa stared at the page. Seeing the events listed one beneath another made them impossible to defend. "I kept telling myself I was following experience," she whispered. Richard looked at her. "No." He gently tapped the report. "You stopped following procedure." Elaine placed the document in the center of the table. "This report will become part of Monday morning's board meeting." Vanessa closed her eyes for a brief second. "I understand." Caleb looked at her. "There will be other Mondays." She met his gaze. "I hope so." He didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward Maya, who was carefully tracing the edge of the display case with one finger. She caught him watching and smiled. In that small smile, Caleb found the strength to keep thinking beyond himself. The replacement check would help 36 families. But if today ended the right way, perhaps it would also protect strangers whose names he would never know. People who would someday walk into this same bank wearing dusty boots, carrying worn folders, and hoping someone looked at their documents before deciding who they were. That possibility, Caleb realized, was worth fighting for just as much as the money. Elaine broke the silence. "Mr. Brooks, before we continue, there's something everyone in this room needs to understand." She opened the partnership folder that had been waiting untouched since before the incident downstairs. Inside was a single page titled Community Partnership Conditions. Every board member had already signed. Only one signature line remained blank. Caleb's. Richard Nolan slid the document toward Vanessa. "Read the first condition." Vanessa hesitated before reading aloud. "The bank agrees that no customer presenting disputed financial documents shall have those documents destroyed before independent verification is completed." She stopped. Her own voice seemed foreign to her. Richard pointed farther down the page. "Employees who request additional verification in good faith may not be disciplined for delaying a transaction." Sophie looked up from the opposite end of the table. She hadn't known that clause existed. Richard continued. "And the final condition." Vanessa swallowed. "The Community Oversight Committee retains the right to suspend the partnership if these standards are violated." She slowly lowered the paper. Elaine spoke quietly. "Those weren't our policies." She looked at Caleb. "They were yours." Caleb gave a small nod. "I asked for them 6 months ago." "Why?" Marcus asked from the doorway. Caleb looked toward him. "Because systems don't fail all at once." Everyone listened. "They fail one shortcut at a time." He rested a hand on the back of Maya's chair. "Someone skips one verification." He raised a finger. "Someone ignores one warning." Another finger. "Someone decides appearance is enough." A third finger. "And one day, an innocent family pays the price." The room fell silent. No one needed him to explain that he wasn't only talking about banks. He had spent years saying the same thing about smoke alarms, emergency exits, and old apartment buildings. Small decisions, serious consequences. Elaine leaned forward. "I agreed to every one of those conditions because they were right." She glanced toward the conference room door. "The painful part is that we failed to follow them before the ink was even dry." Vanessa closed her eyes for a moment. "I did." Caleb gently corrected her. "You weren't alone." She looked up. "You hired people." He nodded toward Sophie. "You trained them." Then he looked at Elaine. "You built the system." Finally, he looked back at himself. "And I chose to trust it." No one escaped responsibility completely. That truth settled over the room more heavily than blame ever could. Maya quietly reached into her backpack. She unclipped the old brass key marked 214 and held it in her palm. "Dad?" "Yes?" "When Mom used this," she looked at the worn metal. "She trusted the door would keep us safe." Caleb felt his throat tighten. "It was supposed to." Maya carefully placed the key beside the partnership agreement. "It shouldn't matter who lives behind the door." No one spoke. The little key lay between the signatures and the blank line waiting for Caleb's name. For Richard, it suddenly became more than a keepsake. It was the reason the entire partnership existed. Not technology, not money, a promise. Elaine looked around the table. "I don't want anyone touching this agreement tonight." The board members exchanged puzzled looks. "We haven't earned his signature yet." Caleb met her eyes. For the first time that evening, he believed she truly understood. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the dark glass. Somewhere across Milwaukee, 36 families were preparing for another uncertain night. Inside the conference room, another decision was taking shape. One that would determine whether this bank merely corrected a mistake or found the courage to become something better because of it. Elaine looked around the table before speaking. "No one signs anything tonight." One of the board members frowned. "We've already approved the partnership." "You approved a proposal," Elaine replied. "Mr. Brooks agreed to a principle. Those are not the same thing." She turned toward Caleb. If you walked away right now, I'd understand. The room waited for his answer. Caleb glanced through the window toward the city below. Somewhere beyond those lights were 36 families expecting good news before the weekend ended. I've thought about it, he admitted. Maya looked up at him. Would we work with another bank? Maybe. Would it be easier? He smiled faintly. For us? Probably. She tilted her head. Then why are you still here? Caleb didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window. When your mom was alive? He said softly. She used to tell me that fixing the easy house never made the neighborhood safer. Maya listened carefully. You fixed the house that needed you most. Elaine lowered her eyes. She realized he wasn't talking about buildings anymore. Caleb turned back toward the room. If I leave because I was treated unfairly, another bank gets this partnership. He paused. But the next father who walks into this branch, his eyes settled on Vanessa, may still be judged before anyone reads his paperwork. The words struck harder than any demand. Richard Nolan folded his hands. So what would it take? Caleb returned to the table. I don't want promises. What do you want? I want policies that survive after all of us leave. Elaine nodded slowly. Tell us. Caleb spoke without looking at a single note. Every disputed financial document must be verified by 2 employees before any action is taken. Richard wrote it down. No original document is ever destroyed while verification is pending. Another note. Any employee who requests additional verification is protected, not punished. Sophie quietly looked away, blinking back tears. And, Caleb continued, every manager should receive annual training on procedural bias. Vanessa frowned slightly. Procedural bias? Caleb nodded. The moment we believe we can recognize honesty by appearance instead of evidence, we've stopped following procedure. No one argued, because everyone downstairs had watched exactly that happen. Elaine looked around the room. Those conditions become bank policy. A board member hesitated. Across this branch? Elaine answered without hesitation. Across every branch we operate. Silence filled the room. Richard slowly smiled. I think this partnership just became much larger than either of us expected. Caleb remained thoughtful. There's one more condition. Elaine gestured for him to continue. I don't want today's incident hidden. Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. Caleb noticed. Not to embarrass anyone. He looked toward Vanessa. But because people can't learn from mistakes, they pretend never happened. Vanessa finally spoke. If that's what you decide. Her voice was quieter than it had been all evening. I'll stand behind it. For the first time since the confrontation began, Caleb saw something different in her expression. Not fear, not pride, regret. Maya reached into her backpack and wrapped her fingers around the old brass key marked 214. She looked at her father. Does this mean more families will have safer doors? Caleb smiled. That's the idea. She slipped the key back onto the zipper. Then Mom would like that. The room grew still. Outside, the city continued into another ordinary Friday night. Inside, what had begun as a shredded check was becoming something far more lasting. A chance to build a system where the next person in dusty work boots would be welcomed with questions about their paperwork instead of assumptions about their worth. And before anyone could speak again, Elaine's assistant stepped quietly into the room. The replacement instrument has been approved, she said. But there's one condition from Crescent National that requires Mr. Brooks's decision before they release the funds. The room grew still. Elaine looked up. What condition? The assistant handed her a printed message from the bank's executive office. They're willing to issue an emergency electronic replacement tonight, she explained. But because the original certified check was destroyed before deposit, they need written authorization from the payee to cancel the original instrument permanently. Richard Nolan nodded. That's standard. The assistant continued. They also asked whether Mr. Brooks wants the replacement issued to him personally or directly to the 214 Safe Homes Fund. Every eye turned toward Caleb. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Maya. She was sitting quietly beside the conference table, swinging her feet just above the carpet, while absent-mindedly rubbing the worn brass key marked 214 between her fingers. "Sweetheart," Caleb asked gently, "what do you think?" She looked surprised that anyone had asked. "If it goes to us," she said carefully, "we could fix our van." Caleb smiled. "We could. And maybe buy you a new jacket." A few people around the table smiled for the first time that evening. His work jacket had faded at the elbows. One sleeve had been stitched twice. It was clean, but it had clearly seen years of job sites, crawl spaces, and school basements. Maya looked down again. But those families still need somewhere to live. Caleb reached over and squeezed her hand. "They do." She nodded once. "Then I already know your answer." Elaine watched the exchange quietly. No speech, no grand gesture. Just a father making sure his daughter understood why some choices mattered more than comfort. Caleb turned back toward the assistant. "Please have Crescent National issue the replacement directly to the 214 Safe Homes Fund." Richard looked up. "You're certain?" "Yes. The funds could legally pass through your account first." "I know. You've earned them." Caleb gave a small shrug. "I earned the right to decide where they belong." No one argued. The assistant stepped into the hallway to relay the decision. Silence settled over the room again, but it felt different now. Not heavy. Reflective. Elaine walked to the window overlooking the city. "When we first met," she said, "our finance team told me you were a difficult negotiator." Caleb chuckled softly. "I've been called worse." "They were wrong," she turned toward him. "You weren't difficult. You just refused to negotiate away the people who couldn't sit at the table." Caleb looked out at the lights spreading across Milwaukee. "I've spent enough nights in apartment parking lots after fires." His voice became quieter. "You stop remembering the buildings." He paused. "You remember the children asking where they're going to sleep." No one interrupted. Even Vanessa lowered her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't imagining a financial mistake. She was imagining 36 families loading their lives into trash bags because someone had decided their building wasn't safe anymore. The cost of her decision suddenly felt much larger than a destroyed check. Elaine returned to the table. "Mr. Brooks, before we finalize anything, there's one more matter." She slid the unsigned partnership agreement toward him. The board is still prepared to move forward." Caleb rested his hand on the cover but didn't open it. "I'm not ready to sign." No one looked surprised. "I'd like to come back Monday." Richard frowned slightly. "After everything that's happened?" Caleb nodded. "Monday morning." He looked toward Vanessa. "After the first customer walks through the front doors." Elaine understood before anyone else did. He didn't want to judge the bank by tonight's promises. He wanted to judge it by Monday morning's actions. And that would become the real test of whether anything inside First Harbor Bank had truly changed. Monday arrived beneath a gray Wisconsin sky. A light rain covered the sidewalks, leaving the city wrapped in the quiet rhythm of windshield wipers and hurried footsteps. At 8:15 a.m., employees began arriving at First Harbor Bank. The lobby looked almost identical to the way it had the previous Friday. The marble floors still reflected the morning lights. The security desk stood in the same place. The welcome sign had not moved an inch, yet somehow everything felt different. Before the doors opened, every employee had already attended an emergency meeting. Elaine stood at the front of the lobby beside Richard Nolan and Sophie Grant. Vanessa stood several feet away, wearing the same navy blazer she had worn 3 days earlier. Only her expression had changed. There will be no speeches, Elaine had told the staff. No excuses. She looked around the room. Today we prove what we learned. At precisely 8:30, the front doors unlocked. No reporters waited outside. No television cameras appeared. No board members watched from the balcony. Just ordinary people beginning another workday. The first customer to enter wasn't Caleb. It was an elderly woman carrying a weathered canvas bag. She walked slowly with the help of a cane. "I need someone to explain this letter," she said, pulling out a folded envelope from another bank. Vanessa took one step forward. "Good morning, ma'am." She smiled warmly. "My name is Vanessa. Let's sit down together." She didn't glance at the growing line. She didn't rush. She didn't make assumptions. She simply listened. Across the lobby, Elaine quietly watched without saying a word. 20 minutes later, a young construction worker entered wearing muddy boots. His fluorescent safety vest was still covered with drywall dust. He held a payroll check with both hands. "I'm sorry," he said nervously. "I've never cashed one this large before." Instead of directing him toward the end of the line, Sophie greeted him. "We'll take care of it." She examined the check carefully. When one security feature required additional verification, she smiled. "This may take a few extra minutes." The young man immediately looked embarrassed. "Did I do something wrong?" "Not at all," Sophie replied. "We verify documents." She smiled again. "We don't verify people." Elaine quietly wrote those words into a small notebook. Nearby, Marcus noticed something else. No employee questioned the workers' clothes. No one whispered. No one exchanged suspicious looks. Procedure had replaced assumption, exactly as Caleb had hoped. At 9:05, the front doors opened once more. This time, Caleb and Maya walked inside together. Neither announced themselves. Neither expected applause. Maya looked around carefully. "It feels quieter." Caleb nodded. "It does." They stood near the entrance for several moments without interrupting anyone. They simply watched. The elderly woman left smiling with her paperwork neatly organized inside a new folder. The construction worker shook Sophie's hand before heading back toward the parking lot. A college student received help opening her first savings account. A retired veteran asked questions about direct deposit. Each customer was treated exactly the same. Not because they looked alike, because the process was. Elaine finally walked over. "You wanted to see Monday." Caleb looked across the lobby one last time. "I did." "And?" Before he could answer, Maya tugged gently on his sleeve. "Dad." She pointed toward the front counter. The old framed sign that had always read, "Know your customer," had been replaced overnight. In its place hung a new plaque. Simple, unpolished, easy for everyone to read. Verify the documents. Respect the person. Every time. Caleb stared at it for a long moment. Then, for the first time since walking into the bank 3 days earlier, he smiled without hesitation. Sometimes real change didn't begin with a $5 million check. Sometimes it began with the first ordinary customer who never realized a painful lesson had quietly made their morning a little safer. When Caleb looked up and saw the new sign, "Verify the documents. Respect the person. Every time." He knew the greatest victory wasn't that his name had been cleared. It was that the next stranger through those doors would be treated with the dignity he had almost been denied. The real cost of prejudice isn't measured by one mistake. It's measured by every opportunity we lose when we decide who someone is before we learn their story. Today, think of one person you've formed a quick opinion about. Give them one extra minute, one honest question, or one chance to be heard, just as Caleb wished someone had done for him before making a decision. Have you ever been judged before anyone truly knew you? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this story stayed with you long after it ended, stay with us. Because the next story reminds us that sometimes the quietest act of courage leaves the deepest mark on a life.